Peace to you, my dear friends. I wanted to start reading this nice, I cannot say little book because it's a really thick book by Richard Baxter. And a little bit about Richard Baxter. Richard Baxter was one of those Puritan authors who was living during the times of Cromwell, and he wrote many books, many interesting books for Christians, and some of his books, when he was writing, his health was so poor that he was thinking that he's going to pass away, but he didn't, and he wrote many things that were really insightful for Christians, not only of his days, but also for those who lived later on. So this book, Christian Directory, it should be more used as a like an encyclopedia. Like when you don't know what to do in this or that particular case, then you go to this book. But I'm just going to read some small portions of it, and I'm going to post them probably on Twitter, on Facebook, or maybe just on my blog. So that's the very first video on Richard Baxter's Christian Directory. So it consists of several parts: Christian ethics, Christian economics, Christian ecclesiastics, and Christian politics. Table of contents: the practical works of Richard Baxter. Volume 1. Christian Ethics. A preface giving some account of the author and of this edition of his practical works. A Christian Directory, or a sum of practical theology, and cases of conscience. Advertisement. Part 1. Christian Ethics. The Introduction. Chapter 1. Part 1. Directions to unconverted, graceless sinners for the attaining of true saving grace. Part 2. The temptations whereby the devil hindereth man's conversion, with the proper remedies against them. Chapter 2. Directions to young Christians or beginners in religion for their establishment and safe proceeding. Chapter 3. The general grand directions for walking with God in a life of faith and holiness, containing the essentials of godliness and Christianity. Directions for learning of Christ as our teacher. The methods of Christ against the tempter. Temptations to particular sins, with directions for preservation and remedy. The tempter's method in applying his prepared baits. Temptations to draw us off from duty. Temptations to frustrate holy duties and make them ineffectual. Directions for faithful serving Christ and doing good. Directions for loving God as our Father and felicity. Directions for quieting and comforting trust in God. Directions for delighting ourselves in God. Directions for thankfulness to God, our benefactor. Directions for glorifying God with the heart. Directions for glorifying God with our tongues in His praises. Directions for the glorifying God in our lives. Appendix. Chapter 4. Subordinate directions against those grand hard sins which are directly contrary to the life of godliness in Christianity. Part 1. Directions against unbelief. Part 2. Directions against hardness of heart. Part 3. Directions against hypocrisy. Part 4. Directions against inordinate man-pleasing, or that overvaluing the favor and censure of man, which is the fruit of pride, and a great cause of hypocrisy, or directions against idolizing man. Part 5. Directions against pride, and for humility. Signs of the worst part of pride against God. Signs of the next degrees of pride as against God. The signs of pride in and about religious duties. Signs of pride in common converse. Part 6. Directions against covetousness or love of riches, and against worldly cares. Part 7. Directions against the master sin, sensuality, flesh-pleasing, or voluptuousness. Chapter 5. Further subordinate directions for the next great duties of religion necessary to the right performance of the former. Directions for redeeming or well-improving time. Title 1. The directions contemplative for redeeming time. Title 2. Directions contemplative for redeeming opportunity. Title 3. Directions practical for redeeming time. Title 4. The thieves or time wasters to be watchfully avoided. Title 5. On whom this duty of redeeming time is principally incumbent. Chapter 6. Directions for the government of the thoughts. Title 1. Directions against evil and idle thoughts. Title 2. Directions to furnish the mind with good thoughts. Title 3. Directions how to make good thoughts effectual, or general directions for meditation. Directions about the work itself. Title 4. The difference between a contemplative life and an obedient active life, with directions concerning them. Title 5. Directions to the melancholy about their thoughts. Title 6. Directions for young students for the most profitable ordering of their studying thoughts. Chapter 7. Directions for the government of the passions. Title 1. Directions against all sinful passions in general. Title 2. Directions against sinful love of creatures. Helps for discovering of sinful love. Helps to mortify sinful love. Title 3. Directions against sinful desires and discontent. Title 4. Directions against sinful mirth and pleasure. Title 5. Directions against sinful hopes. Title 6. Directions against sinful hatred, aversion, and backwardness towards God. Title 7. Directions against sinful wrath or anger. Directions meditative against sinful anger. Directions practical against sinful anger. Title 8. Directions against sinful fear. Directions against sinful fear of God. Directions against sinful fear of the devil. Directions against the sinful fear of men and suffering by them. Title 9. Directions against sinful grief and trouble. Title 10. Directions against sinful despair and doubting. Chapter 8. Directions for the government of the senses. Part 1. General directions for the government of the senses by a life of faith. Part 2. Part 2. Particular directions for the government of the eyes. Part 3. Directions for the government of the ear. Part 4. Directions for governing the taste and appetite. Title 1. Directions against gluttony. 3. The greatness of the sin of gluttony. 4. The directions or helps against it. Title 2. Directions against drunkenness and all excess of drink. Practical directions against tippling and drunkenness. Part 5. Title 1. Directions against fornication and all uncleanness. 2. The directions against fornication. Title 2. Directions against inward filthy lusts. Part 6. Directions against sinful excess of sleep. Part 8. Directions against sinful dreams. Chapter 9. Directions for the government of the tongue. Page 474. Title 1. The general directions. Title 2. Special directions against profane swearing and using God's name irreverently and in vain. Title 3. Special directions against lying and dissembling. Title 4. Special directions against idle talk and babbling. Title 5. Special directions against filthy, ribald, scurrilous talk. Title 6. Directions against profane deriding, scorning, or opposing godliness.